on the third day, I was really breaking down mentally. I was fatigued. I was tired. I was worn by the street and the sun of the day. My hands, my tongue, everything was just dry. And I got to that point where I was standing in the middle of the island inside of a middle of Cairo with traffic, four lanes going one way and four lanes going the other way. And I was just looking like, what the
Welcome to the Beauty Seed.
That's
Nic-
awesome. No,
Nicodemus,
thanks for
you're
including
awesome.
me.
Thanks for joining me because it's been a long time, brother. A lot of water has gone under this proverbial bridge, and there's so much that you and I have, I'm sure, to talk about. And
Okay.
I revisit your experience in your telling of it over time. We've known each other for a long time,
That is
and
true.
done some cool things together and on our own. You,
Yeah, that's true.
I
We've
mean,
collaborated, done independent things. That's awesome.
yeah, you and I met each other at Mother's Cookies,
Oh,
Mother's
yeah.
99, and you found yourself in America through a pretty wild set of circumstances, beginning and leaving South Africa.
Yeah, South Africa has definitely changed my life in so many ways. I never thought I'd ever travel as far as I have and done as much as I have. Um, but yeah, I kind of started in 1990, if I have to think back. Um, one Sunday afternoon, when I was relaxing at my parents' house, I got a knock at the back door, and two military police turned up to arrest me. And I had deferred from compulsory army service in South Africa for 6 years, I think it was at the time. So I kind of lied to the military police while they were interrogating me, and I told them that I was my brother, Paul. And basically, what happened was I realized that my time was running out in South Africa, trying to actually avoid the army. Um, it was 1990. The government was changing hands. We had the referendum. We were voting for equal rights and opportunity. There was so much happening. So, being a white South African, there was a lot of change happening. And, that was like the beginning of the decision to actually leave South Africa. And it just came upon me one Sunday without even thinking about it. And that's how it all kind of started.
And then you made your way out of there. You had like what, 3 hours to get your things together
No,
and
it was basically I was staying in a flat in Pretoria, and what happened was I basically went to work. I resigned. I gave my position to one of my favorite guys I worked with at the time. His name was Stephen. He was an African guy. He had very little opportunity in South Africa. So when I resigned as training manager, I kind of appointed him as the new training manager when I left. So he was very surprised. And I said to him, Stephen, if you come to my house, I need to move all my stuff. So he basically turned up with a little Bantam Bucky, and everything I had in my flat, my beds, my TV,
what, pray
everything, I just
tell, is a bantam bucky?
packed it literally vertical. It was like 3 meters high with a mattress strapped on the top, classic African move. And he came, he was standing there and he was kind of like bewildered. He didn't know where I was moving. And I basically hadn't told him when I resigned at the company I worked for. And when he turned up on the weekend, I'd already booked my ticket to Israel. And in those days, you couldn't travel anywhere as a South African you couldn't get a visa to most countries. So I actually left South Africa with a no visa to the only country that would let me travel, which was Israel at the time. So I kind of gave everything to Stephen. I had this conversation where we basically had an amazing hug, and I gave him everything I owned. I had about 200 US dollars, a backpack, a passport, and I climbed the plane and saw my family for the last time in 1990 for, I don't know, 16 years of, I think.
Mm-hmm.
That was the first time I left South Africa. And I ended up in Israel, which was also a crazy environment to be in, coming from South Africa. It's coming from a country where you've got diversity and a lot happening. You go to Israel, where you actually have to speak some kind of language to get on with people, Hebrew, Arabic. So you start picking up things. But when I actually arrived in Israel, I ended up on this kibbutz up in the northern part of Israel called Kiryat Shmona and Far Bloom. And I started volunteering in a community collective there, where we worked every day on these hydroponic farms and amazing farms, really, collective farms where you had volunteers from all over the world. You had community kitchen, and basically you had a set order of things to do when you volunteered. You could even become a Israeli citizen at that time. So if I volunteered for 4 years, I could become Israeli as well. So that was the beginning of me arriving in Israel. And it was a big wake up for me, because the first 2 weeks I was in a war zone, living with cannons going off daily, every 20 minutes. And it kind of left me a little bit shell shocked. So then
I say so.
that was the first stage of it.
Yeah. So when you're on the kibbutz, what, I grew up in the commune centric communities of the post sexual revolution era of America, and I saw a lot of things that worked with them and what didn't work. What allowed those kibbutzes the efficiency and effect to function really well? Because it seems like they have a lot of upsides in how they're managed, from my knowing of
Okay.
it. What was your experience with that?
Well, my experience had changed the way I thought about farming, coming from South Africa, having studied at one of the agricultural colleges here. I had an agricultural background. I thought I actually knew what the fuck I was doing when I went to Israel. And literally within 24 hours, you on a hydroponic system, you're in a semi-desert terrain, you've got extremes. Farmers don't work as independent farmers. They work collectively. So they actually have communes all over Israel. The big communes are called moshavs, and the small ones that are run by the government are called kibbutzes. They run differently. They have different management kind of things. Kibbutz, for instance, is run by a local community, and everybody in the community, every family has a collective position at the table. Most things are done orchestrated, like food. There's an open cafeteria, so everybody in kibbutzes will get 3 meals a day. You get accommodation, and it's all pre-set up, where they have these little flats. You book into a flat as a volunteer, and then you get signed a certain amount of duties. And whether you sign a contract to be an Israeli citizen, which is learn the language and join, and basically you do 4 years army service in kibbutzes to become a Israeli citizen.
So out of one compulsory service into another.
Pretty much, whether you want to or not.
Yeah.
And that's the one kind of commune is run by the government. And then the moshavs I was basically on in, so after the 2 weeks I was up in the northern part of Israel, I was like shell shocked, I climbed on a bus. I hadn't been paid because you only get paid every month. So the first month, if you don't have money, you're pretty screwed.
You're kind of attached to the company store, as it were.
Yeah, pretty much. And that's the other thing is it's not a quick out. You can leave at any point, but whether you get paid is kind of your own decision kind of
Yeah.
thing. And then I basically climbed on a bus and I went all the way to the southern part of Israel, which was a very big moshav I heard about, which is called En Yahav. Um, I basically climbed off the bus and sat at a bus stop, not knowing where I was. I was out in the middle of an open stretch at a bus stop, and the road just went down the way, and the bus drove off. And I climbed out looking kind of confused, like I was lost. And I stood there going, where is this moshav? Because there weren't even signs at that point in the moshav where I was, because the moshav was technically 16 kilometers over the Israeli border in Jordan, where the actual community
Gotcha.
was on the boundary of the minefield. So I was in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't know what the fuck to do. So I was like literally stuck there, and amazing thing happened. This guy in a bucky, he drove up, and it was almost like deja vu. The guy, his name was Izzy Bloch. He stopped in front of me. He introduced himself. I said, hello, I'm Nick from South Africa. And he said, I'm also from South Africa. And I was like, you're pulling my leg kind of thing. And he basically was at Farm 50 in Yahav, and I signed a contract and worked with him for almost about 2 years with about 1,000 Thai volunteers, 200, 300 English volunteers, a few Americans, and then there was quite a large amount of South Africans and Australians that made up the big section of volunteers on the Moshav En Yahav. But it was kind of different. It wasn't like the kibbutzes. The Moshav, you had your own accommodation, you had to provide your own food. So when I got there, I was living on watermelons and honeydew melons and tomatoes. I think my fridge at one stage was like a phase of honeydew melons and watermelons, and I would have it every way I could with sugar, scoop it.
Sounds like a diet made for squirts.
Well, watermelon is actually really good for you, and so is honeydew melons. So
Yeah.
I kind of was fine for the first month until I got paid, and then things kind of eased up, and I kind of started enjoying Israel a little bit. But that was the beginning of the Moshav experience, and it was very amazing, kind of different.
What was different about it?
Well, okay, Israel is a militant state. Let's just go straight to it. Let's
Sure.
just say when I walked, no, the house I lived at, my private little house, the army commander's weapon stash was stored in a bunker right next to me. So I had everything from a Kalashnikov to AK-47 literally in the doorway, 10 meters from my house.
Yeah.
So I was armed to the hilt, but I never touched a gun.
Yeah.
But then I worked in the fields with these Thai people, so I had to actually learn some Thai. And it was interesting working with Thai people because they were their own kind of collective volunteer force. They got, if I remember correctly, the king of Thailand picked the poorest families and chose members to take contracts for 4 to 5 years in Israel. If they volunteered for 5 years, then they would actually go home with a 5-year bonus because they wouldn't take their bonus. And every year they would get a bonus from the collective if they stayed on the 5-year contract.
Mhm.
So they were pretty well set. The guys I worked with were a family of Thai people, brother and sister and cousin, Dam, Nali, and I think his name's Son. And they were pretty amazing people. They taught me some Muay Thai, but working was like next level. I wrapped up. I never saw the sun. I looked like a Bedouin. I worked in these hot houses with tomatoes going 3, 4, 5 meters, watermelons, honeydew melons, herbs. We were doing so much. And the collective also had a warehouse and a packing shed. So in the evenings, I started working in the packing shed, packing and sorting vegetables and fruit and herbs and flowers to the respective packaging systems to fly internationally with Carmel around the world. So it was a pretty industrious little place. Everything happened right there. They had their own workshop, their packing shed. All the collective tools were communally used. Tractors were communally used. So a lot of the things that each farmer would need independently, you didn't have to actually do because collectively you all pooled your resources. Some farmers actually had their own private little thing they would do, like blood roses or specific types of orchids. So there were very unique types of farmers where not everything was eggplants and dates and
Yeah.
vegetables. It was actually more involved in a specific way to pack it. It's a shipping order. It's flying DHL, and you can't steal a rose because the owner will shoot you, kind of thing. So you always have to be on your toes in Israel. I met some really good South Africans.
Yeah. Well, it's a very,
Uh,
what strikes me real quick is that it's a very different technique of diversity of crop, where in America we have these huge swaths of monocrops and the ups
yeah,
and downs of that type of growing. Yeah, a lot more resilience in a multiplicity of
it,
avenues.
that's actually a really good point. In America, they do these broad agricultural where they do monocrops. In Israel, it's specific. So if there's 150 farmers on one farm, moshav, in Israel, I think there would be fish farming, date farms, hydroponics, heirloom, medicinal herbs, honeydew melons, watermelons, tomatoes, ketchups. Then we're going through all the little specifics that each farmer does. So from a collective, I think there's even oil pressing, olive oil, dates, blocks. There's like finished products that are actually made on some moshavs and they get shipped. They don't go to another market. They go directly. They are the market. So they ship
Right. And
internationally.
so is there like a centralized decision-making process of how the
Oh,
distribution
yeah.
of that goes?
The Mochav collective, the farmers actually do make collective decisions, especially it's like it's run like the packing shed runs a certain portion of it, and then the farmers do independently some of their own, kind of planning. So they are independent, but they do work together in that way.
That's cool. And so you spent
Yeah.
a couple years there, and
Well, I
what was your
spent
impetus to leave there?
Well, that's the whole thing is after working 2 years, you get paid about $2.20 a day. Um, that's American. And then after working for about 2 years, I'd managed to save up about 2,000 US dollars. So I was like rich. So I decided to take a holiday. And the first time I went to Cyprus, I went to Haifa, went to Cyprus, Rhodes,
I
and then
feel
I
like
ended up on the Greek islands.
but I feel like we missed a part because
No, no, no.
you lost your
That,
backpack.
that's the second time. Then I actually went back to Israel after working in Greece for 6 months. I earned a little bit of money. And then I went back to the Moshe. And after, I think it was 6 months, I had enough money to actually go to Egypt.
Ah, yes. Okay.
Okay. Because in the timeline of things, I did travel more than I remember. for your experience. A lot more happened, really.
Yeah.
So what happened was I basically had enough money, went to the Gaza, crossed over the Gaza, went and booked into a Bedouin camp for about 2 weeks. And I had a little holiday, and then I had enough money to go to Cairo, where I wanted to go to the museums. And this is where it all went pie.
Yeah.
So, fresh off the boat, let's say, I arrived in Cairo off a bus from Dahab, thinking I'd just book into a hotel because I was tired and weary from my travels. So it was early in the morning, about 9 o'clock. I went into this hotel, and when I booked into the hotel, I kind of signed in. The guy told me that I had to take this room. I could have a shower, but I'd have to wait. And if I wanted to put anything in the safe, he would put it in the safe for me. So I didn't think. I just kind of gave him my stuff, went and put my stuff down, went and took a shower, and came back to my room, and my backpack, passport, boots, and all my cash was gone.
Oh, snap.
Yeah. And it
In an
didn't really,
unknown country.
well, that wasn't the wake up call. It happened about 3 days later in kind of like, I don't know, asking God, I don't know. It's a whole thing that happened. Basically, I was standing in a tower, went to the front desk, and the guy that booked me in wasn't standing there. There was another guy, and he insisted, "Who are you?" And I told him I just booked in. And he said, "No, he's the owner." And I was like, "What?" I said, "I just gave all my money, my bags, and everything to the guys behind the desk." And he said, "Nobody was here. People checked out, but nobody's come in." So
Damn.
basically, they checked out, stole my shit. And then he was kind of rude, insisted I leave because I had no proof, no ID, and no backpack lying around. So I couldn't even prove I had been in the hotel yet. So I was kind of kicked out on the streets with a little towel, a pair of shorts, um, barefoot, and a t-shirt in Egypt. And I couldn't speak the language. I wasn't fluent in Farsi or any of the other Arabic languages there. So I started walking the streets, and I walked literally Cairo from one side to the next because the main road goes right down it. And then you walk all the way out to the pyramids. And then I ended up at the museum, and I just tried to keep myself busy most of the first day. But as night came on, I was kind of wandering the streets and didn't know where to go. And I saw there were these restaurants where people were watching and drinking tea and chilling out. So I sat on a chair and kind of like just took a break. And to my amazement, I was sitting in the abattoir of all places. And in Egypt, in the early morning, when you don't know where to go, you end up in these markets where they herd the animals in behind these screens. They slaughter them halal right there in front of you and hang them, and then you order your meat. And before the sun comes up, most of the meat's been divvied up. So I was sitting in the meat markets most of the night, and I ended up walking the streets again. And I really hadn't eaten, washed, or anything. And I decided to go to the South African embassy to save my ass finally, because somebody told me there was an embassy in Cairo. So I was like, yay.
With no passport.
Yeah, wait. I have to take a moment here. I don't want to break the posture before it happens. Um, so shit, I was really up shit creek, and I hadn't hit me yet. I got some instructions to go to this hotel. So I walked along, and it took me about 2-3 hours in Cairo's traffic, barefoot in a t-shirt and pair of shorts, to make my way to this hotel where I had to convince somebody to allow me to go into the embassy, which was not an embassy. It was a hotel room. And the ambassador at the point was basically sitting at a table across from his bedroom, where he looked at me and he was kind of perplexed, like, who are you?
Yeah.
And I was like, hello, um, I'm from South Africa. My name's Nicholas Vernon. And he's like, listen to me intently. And after a couple of minutes of me talking, he said, I can't prove who you are. You have to first verify who you are because your passport's been stolen. And second, we've got to stop your passport at the border and let the border know that somebody's stolen your passport. So then he started to tell me that in 6 months, I can come back. And yeah, that one just was like a cold cock punch to the head. And then he said, we can then verify if you are who you are. So I sat and filled out all the forms. My hands were so dirty, I messed the forms up. So he allowed me to wash my hands. And while I was busy, I washed my feet and my hands at the same time because they were pitch black in Cairo. The streets are dirty. And I was really dirty. So I washed myself up in his little bathroom, kind of destroyed his towel, and then sat for 10 minutes and filled out all the information. And I even spoke to him in Afrikaans to convince him I'm South African. Maybe it'd help me. But at the end of the day, he gave me a bottle of water and said, good luck. See you in 6 months.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. Then it really started to wear on me thin. I mean, like, you don't realize how fucked you are or how what would you do in that kind of situation? I don't know. It's like sometimes, some people would just, steal food or hurt somebody to get arrested, to put in jail. I think I was close to that point. I was like really needed a kind of friendly moment to happen. And I don't know what to think. At that point, I kind of left the hotel and I started walking the streets again. And that night, I was really on the search for something. I started to feel almost hungry to the point you could feel it. And you really wonder, where's your faith? Where's God?
Yes.
And what can he do? And, you start to appeal to reasonings and people, but language is a big difficulty. And sometimes you never really get, what you need. A glass of water, even in Cairo, you don't want to drink the water. You just get the shits, if I remember, and some of the best shits in the world, standing projectiles kind of thing. So you don't want to just drink any water. So you're limited. And on the third day, I was really breaking down mentally. I was fatigued. I was tired. I was worn by the street and the sun of the day. My hands, my tongue, everything was just dry. And I got to that point where I was standing in the middle of the island inside of a middle of Cairo with traffic, 4 lanes going one way and 4 lanes going the other way. And I was just looking like, on the one side of the main road. And I just kind of saw it and I realized that was my opportunities to sit down and have a 5-minute nap. So I literally crossed the street and I got to this chair, and without noticing anything but the shadow around me, I kind of dozed off on the chair. And that was the beginning of everything. It's like you could feel something was about to happen, but I didn't understand what. And I was patient enough to take the moment to relax and
Be with
get
it.
out of my anger and frustration and the dirt and everything, and just sit and have 5 minutes to think. Oh. Okay, so at this point, I was totally not ready to actually go on. I've had a few times in my life where literally it's the grace of God and the patience of understanding everything happens for a reason. And I've had many of those consequences and situations happen in my life. And this one was, I think, the first time I really was humbled by who I was, where I was. And the whole thing just kind of burnt me in that way because you don't have a phone. You can't just phone somebody. You don't have
Yeah,
family, you don't have anything. So I think it's all up to faith for me in that sense. And I've always had magic when I've needed it.
totally.
And I kind of was woken at this point by a super dark Sudanese kid.
Oh, yeah.
He was about 21 years old. And he was standing next to me on my left side. And he kind of nudged me. And I looked up and I looked at him and I couldn't understand. I didn't know if I was sitting on his chair. And I hadn't really, figured out what the hell was going on. And he kind of like looked down and looked at the backgammon board and kind of looked at me and kind of shrugged. So I was like, okay, I guess he wants to play backgammon. So I kind of nodded and he sat down at this table and the chair that was like just off the chair that I was sitting on. And he set up the board, and in silence, I just kind of like was not really paying attention. I was just kind of observing what was going on because we hadn't said a word and nothing had really happened. And we played the first game, and he rolled the dice. He gave me the dice. And I just kind of was like really lucky. I kept throwing doubles and everything. The right numbers just happened. And I was like, I can't believe
Things are
this.
looking up.
Things are looking up. But I hadn't even thought about it. And he kind of looked at me and he kind of gestured. And some tea came over and I got a cup of tea. And I was sitting there playing this game of backgammon with this guy I hadn't said a word to with a cup of tea. And I was like, okay. So I had a sip of tea and I was playing backgammon. And after winning the first round, we set it up again. I was having a little bit of fun and I was like, yeah, this is kind of cool. And then we played a second game and I was drinking my tea and just kind of observing, but I wasn't noticing my surrounding, the traffic I wasn't aware of. It was like this was the only thing that I could really observe was the game. There was nothing keeping me in communication at this point except the game and rolling the dice. So it went on and I just kept seeming to win. And I think by the time the third game we were setting it up, he kind of looked at me and he had this look on his face like he wanted to talk. And I just looked at him like, okay, but you know, I didn't say anything because he didn't say anything. So I was just sitting there quietly. And he kind of looked over and he looked down and he took out a pen and a little pad of paper and he started this imperfect English, I might add. He was writing, "Hi, my name is John. I'm from Sudan." And I read it. He slid it over the table and he handed it to me. And I kind of looked at it. I was like, okay. So I took the pencil from him and I wrote there, "Hi, my name's Nick. I'm from South Africa." And I slid it back to him. And it was just like the beginning of basic communication, but the English, the writing, the way he wrote his English, he was very, very cool. He writes, you know, you have those moments where you just want to smack yourself and, like,
Is this real?
yeah,
Yeah.
you got to do it again, and then he started writing and then he said, It was like, I'm studying at the University of Cairo. I'm a student. And then he slid it over to me, and I was like, um, I'm a tourist on the streets. And he was like, huh? And he was like, he said, you are sitting, he's writing this, in a deaf restaurant. Everyone in this restaurant is deaf, including the owner. And I'm like, huh?
What?
So I had to like really like read it. And then I looked up and I looked around, and
Am I dead?
the first moment it's like you smack.
Yeah.
I see everybody signing, and it came to me. I'm sitting in a deaf restaurant. Of all the places I could have sat. And John was amazing kid. He had a group of friends. There was like about 8 of us. He kind of asked me a question, and I explained to him that I actually was fucked, that I had no place to sleep. I was out on the streets. I had no food. I had no money, and I didn't know what to do because nobody spoke English. And he read it with the calmest face. It was almost like it pickled me to watch him read it. Like, He's like, really? And I was like, fuck. Um, then he picked up the pencil and he started writing, and he said, it was like the moment when everything is revealed to you. And he says, don't worry, I will take you to the hostel. You can have a shower at the hostel at the university. You can stay at the dormitory. There's spare rooms there. I was great. He said, and I think tonight you must come with me to meet Professor Adi. And I was like, okay. So at that point, I was basically playing backgammon, sitting in this restaurant, trying to relax. And the next 24 hours, everything had changed. I had a place to live, I had food, I'd got a job at this school in the poorest part of Cairo, where I was teaching little girls at one of the only schools, Misra. And it was like situated so beautifully because the classroom that I got for the next 6, 7 months was facing the Giza pyramid. So every day I had Giza in the background, these little kids. And that school with little girls changed me again, because that taught me so much about myself. It also showed me some things about Cairo that I never understood. It also made me meet some of the most amazing people, some of the most wealthiest people in Cairo. And I had a really amazing time there because of it. But that was only phase one of me getting my passport back and
Yeah.
getting out of Egypt, which was, it took me a year and a half to get out of Egypt. So this was barely, the first month in Egypt where I was not realizing how long I'd actually be trapped in Egypt, trying to get somewhere in my life and being optimistic. And a lot happened, when I was in Cairo. It was amazing. I really enjoyed the things I did. The school that I went to, um, I woke up at the university and a bus picked me up and literally took me to the school each morning. Um, it was amazing because the school didn't look like any school I've ever seen. It had a big 4-story wall around the outside, so nobody could actually look into the school. And the second story, there were windows, but nothing on the first level. And then you went into this big gate, and there was a courtyard play area, kind of, I don't know, 20 by 20. And then there were classrooms, and I was assigned the classroom on the second floor. And that was it was an amazing place to be. I enjoyed Cairo, the people.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
you eventually, I take it, you got your passport.
Well, you want to know the other half of the story? This is a
Unless you want to
1-2.
save it for a second round.
We can actually, at this point, we could leave it at me working at the school. Um, a lot of things happened. It's like with the deaf kids in the evenings, I used to go to movies and we'd start communicating writing, and I'd
Yeah.
describe the facet of the movie to the deaf kids. And then we'd go back to the movie with the whole entourage of all our friends that were deaf. And it was amazing to watch John sign. I think it was Demolition Man. Um, yeah, he stood up on stage with all these deaf kids, and he actually, I remember sitting at the table the night before, like he'd ask me every question, and I'd sit there try to explain cryogenics and some of the scenes in the movie because we had watched it. And then while I was describing it, just watching him the following day get up on stage and sign that movie to all his friends was like, I think, one of the highlights of my time in Cairo. I remember not having, a laugh that wasn't founded. It was just such an awesome time to hang out with deaf kids and not being deaf, kind of a thing. And that, I think, was like the highlight for me before I actually had to go and figure out how to get from Egypt back to Sinai through the Israeli border to the South African embassy in Israel. So we'll leave it at the first part of the story for you,
Excellent.
for the
Pick that.
podcast.
We'll pick that
Kind
up
of
in
good
round two.
enough for the intro for the next one.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the Beauty Seed and regaling us with a fucking wild ride. And it gets wilder. So all you out there
Well,
listening, tune in for round two because it's it's a good one. And we'll get into what you're up to now because I'm sure that's equally, if not as interesting in itself.
wow.
So grace be
You
upon
know,
you. Lots of love. Yep.
awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, Al. It's
You
so nice
too.
to see you. It's
Well,
actually great to have this time. I know we've had a lot of stories, with California, the boats, trim camps, Burning Man, Las Vegas, out in the forest. We have had adventures, you and
oh,
me,
for sure.
are, I think, on a level of stoic,
Yeah.
historic
And
figures.
epic at the same time.
I don't think there's very many kids our age doing this shit. And
No
it's
doubt.
fucking awesome to see.
And we'll get into some of that. And thanks so much.